Dice, your papa talking to you now, Dice. Come on.
And the watermelons are that way. Oh, Willie.
Yes, Mr. Cook.
And the chicken house is over there.
Chicken house?
Uh-huh.
What am I waiting for?
I don't know.
Me either. Tally-ho.
What you say? You ain't getting fresh with me, is you, colored boy?
Funny, huh?
Don't you give me none of that double talk.
Well,
you hear me?
what some folks find funny, others find tragic.
Well, you keep still, okay? Oh, wait, hey.
Alex.
Honest, it's me.
Why is he so scared?
No, I ain't, boss.
Why are we always so scared? Well, wouldn't you be? I did say we. I'm black, you see. Tell you what, you take those rose-colored glasses off, and I'll loan you a special pair of colored folks' shoes. Let's see how they feel to you. Come on. Take a little stroll with me.
Didn't I tell you to bring this water?
That's right, it was you.
When I first became aware of movies messing with my mind, I must have been around 12 or 13. It was around the end of the Second World War. Well, they'd been messing with my mind before that, but I just wasn't aware of it. No, that's not right. I just wasn't able to put a name to what I was feeling when I'd leave the triple feature on Saturday afternoon at the National Rat Alley. That's what we call the cinema in my neighborhood. Later, I learned what that emotion was. It was called shame. Movie historians are always going on about how my 1971 film Sweetback sprang out of nowhere, about how it was such a revolutionary film, a true original that didn't owe its allegiance to anything in the past. Well, it wasn't part of any tradition or movement out of the past. But on the contrary, au contraire, it didn't just spring out of thin air. The movies were the advanced scouts into adulthood. Not only could you learn how to ride a horse, climb a palm tree, or ski, you could learn how to court a girl and even kiss. But most importantly, the movies offered a peephole into the world outside of my ghetto. The only problem was I couldn't project the me. By me, I mean myself and the colored folks in the neighborhood who comprised my entire universe with what the movies were showing. The colored folks in the movies were always quaking and yassa bossing and shuffling, huh? They didn't bear any resemblance to the majestic, hard-working black folks strutting around the south side of Chicago, where I was from. The men were tough and fearless, and the women were regal queens. A zillion miles away from the army of broad-beamed mammies that the movies portrayed.
Leave them things to God, son. In his kingdom, all men are equal.
And suck in.
You better take Pete and feed him.
Yes, sir.
Daddy, you'll probably stay for lunch.
Yes, sir.
Then suddenly in a flash, like I said, I was 12 or 13 at the time, and the Second World War was just winding down. It was all revealed to me. The newspapers and the magazines and the radio, there was this talk of the new Negro coming to the screen. Well, what had happened was that to win the war, the government needed everybody's help, not just white folks. And besides, Hitler had given racism a bad name. Anyhow, in the effort to win the war, the government had done a lot of flag waving to unite the nation. There was a lot of talk about the United States being a melting pot with liberty, equality, and justice for all, regardless of race, creed, or color, etc. A little social engineering to get blacks and women except in jobs formerly all male, all white preserved. In the flush of victory over the Nazis, America actually bought into its own propaganda. In short, the U.S. was experiencing a flood of democracy, a wave or two of which lapped up onto the shores of Hollywood. Hence the promise of movies depicting Negro characters more honestly, more dignified, i.e., the new Negro.
Private Morse reporting for duty, sir. The special assignment.
If Hollywood invented the new Negro, it meant it had invented the old Negro in the first place. Question about racism in Hollywood films, everybody likes to put the blame on D.W. Griffith and his Birth of a Nation. A cinematic masterpiece in the first Hollywood blockbuster, it was filled with dancing, chicken chomping, raping, quaking darkies. Birth of a Nation? Well, that's a lot of crap. From the very, very beginning, there was racism in American movies. Even in old Thomas Edison's first images, back at the birth of cinema, blacks were only presented as stereotypes or caricatures. And it sure didn't stop there. If you ask Hollywood about it, they would maintain it was all in the name of art. No harm being done, just a little good, clean fun. Well, maybe kinda, sorta if you're white. No harm being done, good, clean fun. The white folks in Hollywood really ruled the roost. They drew Negroes any way they wanted to. They even put on charcoal when they felt like doing something extra stupid. And played at being black, too.
Now we is all sisters under the skin.
Implicit to me is that they knew what they were doing all along.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, monsieur. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Miss Bellman.
Yes, Miss Maggie.
Yes, sir.
Looking over one's shoulder at the old treatment of the Negro, the new treatment was an improvement. Relatively speaking, of course.
Wesley Epps, Private, 3rd Engineer Battalion.
The characters were a tiny bit more three-dimensional.
From officers, Sergeant.
We got the explosive necessary to fix that bridge?
Private Matowski and me kind of made a special collection.
I alone escaped. It was then I captured this man to carry my pack.
What is your name?
Sergeant Major Tamboo, 4th Sudanese Battalion.
Tinseltown went strutting around with its chest poked out, feeling all proud of itself about how liberal it was being in recognizing the Negro. Besides, they weren't worried because of the golden rule. The American golden rule, that is. He who has the gold makes the rules.
It's up to you, Ben. If you say no...
If it's no, I want the money right away. And I hold you responsible, Arnold.
Sometimes in new Negro movies, we were allowed to dress normal and even act as equals.
People don't count with you, do they, Mr. Robertson? You've been square with me, Arnold. I'll fight Davis.
Okay, Mr. Roberts.
Blacks became a vehicle for a moral lesson about justice or tolerance.
I said get up and walk.
But Doc, you know I can't.
Always with a sympathetic, central white character to mediate the experience of the black one.
Moss, get up and walk. You dirty nigger, get up and walk.
In the new Negro movies, the white character, a doctor or teacher or something like that, carried forward the same paternalistic attitude that kindly old slave owners and Little Miss Shirley Temple were famous for in the old Negro movies. Another new Negro movie was Pinky.
Pinky?
Slang term for a light-skinned Negro who passes for white, played by a white actress.
Pinky child.
There are a lot of light-skinned blacks, since in the States, by law, a few drops of African blood means you are a Negro.
My Pinky.
She falls in love with a white guy, a real white guy, offers to take her away as long as she doesn't tell anybody about being colored. She turns him down, but all is not lost, because a kindly old white lady leaves the plantation to Pinky when she dies.
Prove you're addicted to the truth like you pretend. Wherever you are, be yourself.
What am I then? You tell me. You're the ones that set the standards, you whites. You're the ones that judge people by the color of their skins. Well, by your own standards, by the only ones that matter to you. I'm as white as you are. That's why you all hate me. What should I do? Dye my face? Grovel and shovel? Say yasm and know 'em?
Shut
up, girl.
Oh, excuse me, sir, but why are you two white men mamming her? She's nothing but a low-down colored gal. I tried to steal my man.
Make him stop! Make him stop!
You heard what she said. He's got to slap her down, unless it's true.
Yes, it's true. I'm colored. My grandmother's Mrs. Dicey Johnson.
Mrs. Dicey Johnson, I ought to slap them both down cheap.
Then there was Lost Boundaries. A light-skinned Negro played once again by a white actor passes himself off as a real bona fide white man to become a doctor.
What should I do with this, doctor? I can't ship it with the others.
What's wrong with it?
It came from somebody's chauffeur, and he's as black as your hat. We could refuse him, but of course we can't mix his with the white plasma.
And why can't we, Miss Richmond?
Well, they certainly wouldn't do it where I come from.
We do it here.
There'll be criticism if I do.
There'll be worse if you don't.
Eventually, the truth comes out and he's ostracized by the white folks.
I'm part Negro, Howard. So's your mother. That makes you a Negro, too.
But I'm white.
No. We're all Negroes.
Most of the new films trotted out for the edification of us colored masses dealt with what was called the Negro problem. Hell, it always seemed more like a white problem to me. They treated the question of white supremacy with a little more sophistication, but it was the same old racism. Intruder in the Dust, an old black man. Okay, because he's old and past his sexual prime. Is saved by a white boy from a rabid southern lynch mob who fades gently into the night without a whimper once they realized the old black guy was being framed. I guess the moral is that lynch mobs are okay. They're just out to do the right thing like anybody else.
Proud, stubborn, insufferable. But there he goes, the keeper of my conscience.
Our conscience, Uncle John.
sad fact was that the insults had only gone underground and were more insidious and psychologically damaging than ever. The difference of the treatment of the Negro in the old films and the new was like the difference in the supposedly liberal North's treatment of the Negro and the openly hostile South, which didn't bother to hide its prejudice or its disdain. At least down south, lynch mobs notwithstanding, you knew where you stood.
Did you hear me call you?
No, sir, I sure didn't.
You deaf?
No, sir, I ain't deaf.
Hollywood even did one called Black Like Me.
Were you calling me? I heard you calling boy, but I didn't think you were calling me.
Where a white actor plays a white man who puts on shoe polish or something like that to experience what a black man had to go through.
Well, what's the big idea?
I want to find out what it's like to be a Negro in the South.
You kidding?
No.
How was this possible? I mean, how could Hollywood operate with such impunity? This was with the Cold War raging, mind you, with the Russians looking for any chink in democracy's armor. How could America set itself up as a bastion of liberty and equality on one hand and treat its colored citizens so shabbily on the silver screen and get away with it? Well, this brings us to the peculiar plight of the Negro in America. Although population-wise there are more black people in the United States than most European nations, they are in the minority, outnumbered by a margin of 10-to-1 by the whites. But most importantly, the control of the media and the flow of information about life in these United States to the outside world remains almost exclusively in white hands. Get it? Once there was a world in Negro hands, the tiny world of independent black films. In the South, the American version of apartheid segregation was still the law, and there were more than 300 all-black movie houses. From the early days of silent film to shortly after the Second World War, a span of nearly 50 years, marginalized by the lack of distribution, a fragile but feisty independent black cinema existed.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Mr. Wilson. My best wishes on your birthday.
My friends have congratulated me already. Good wishes. Good wishes mean good, filling my daughters' heads with ideas about leaving me.
Please, Pa.
But, Mr. Wilson, you're a big man. You can see that the work down south needs people like Owen.
Black movies made by African-American filmmakers were extremely popular with black audiences, tired of seeing themselves portrayed as slaves, servants, hussies, mammies, loafers, or dumb bucks subject to run amok. These were the only films that portrayed them as human beings. And like everybody else, they were desperate to see themselves as heroic. And they ate it up.
Black Manhattan. What a place.
You really love Harlem, don't you, Pa?
Yes, there's so much to be done here.
Well, folks, I made them myself. They have a little kick in them, but not too much. She's a lucky woman, that Sister Minnie is. Yes, and she's got such a good man for her.
Many of these old films were racist in their own right. The myth of white supremacy was so pervasive that the African-American filmmakers accepted it, treating blacks themselves as a culture or class category rather than a racial one, with the heroes and heroines invariably lighter skinned than the villains.
What's the big idea, fella?
If you didn't have that gun, I'd show you.
Independent African-American cinema has never been significant in the United States. neither the number produced or the means of distribution or the audience eventually reached. I never even saw an independent black film growing up, and I grew up in a black ghetto on the south side of Chicago. I only became familiar with Oscar Micheaux and Spencer Williams and the other early pioneers years later, when on becoming a student of film, I heard rumors of these lost masterpieces and tracked them down. But the purely black cinema was driven out of business by two market forces. Primo, the rising cost of making a movie, and Duzio, the shrinking number of theaters where the movies, thanks to the end of segregation, could be screened. Yeah, progress. The so-called golden era of independent black films is a myth, conceived to cloud the excruciating position of the African American in cinema. The real history of independent black cinema has been one of struggle, studded starts, and stunted careers. A courageous file of brothers and sisters who sacrificed to bring a few precious seconds of black humanity to the silver screen. All that wonderful talent wasted. Well, hopes dashed or dreams deferred. You still had to eat. And if you were a black actor in Hollywood, that meant you tossed a spear, cooked somebody for dinner, or took a bullet. Or you brought a drink, or carried a plate.
Haven't I repeatedly told you not to cut up the morning paper until I've had a chance to look at it?
Maybe you had to stay after school, Huck.
Well, did I act like that when I graduated from high school?
Pretty much.
I don't have to row, do I?
2 furrows.
Who elected Mr. Rittenhouse?
Mr. Rittenhouse. Written to you.
You think he's capable?
Sure.
Does he always leave so early?
Oh, he never. Well, he's got a girl up to the Blue Parrot. Goes up there all the time.
The only ray of hope was Sam.
You used to be a much better liar, Sam.
You remember the colored piano player in Casablanca?
You bad luck time.
Play it, Sam.
It was the first time I ever remembered seeing a black character go through an entire movie without having to kiss ass.
I'll hum it for you.
In the ghetto, the people were so proud that they would make the projection stop the film and run Sam's part over and over and over again.
Sing it, Sam.
You must remember this. A kiss is just a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh.
Throughout the history of Hollywood, there were 3 sanctuaries for more virulent racism. One place was, ironically, the Hollywood version of an all-black movie.
You see, the trouble with you is, what I mean is, when it comes to women, you just don't know, or else...
Man, you're rambling. What hit you?
Look at that gal standing over there. There's nothing like that in that book you was talking about. Better not be.
Did you been redeemed?
The second place, sometimes anyway, where blacks were allowed their dignity was the church, the pulpit being considered a trusted ally in the subjugation of black brains. At least that is until the civil rights movement began. Anyway, Negroes were given a bit of leeway to swagger and feel good about themselves when attending to religious matters.
Let the fish fry proceed.
Entertainment was the third sanctuary of dignity. Outside of being required to mug it up, the Negro entertainers were encouraged to do their routines, strut their stuff, to sing and dance their hearts out.
Got misery, misery I can't lose.
Now you will hear a song you all like by a singer you all like, Miss Lena Horne.
Buy a paper doll that I can call my own, a doll that other fellas cannot steal, and all those flirty, flirty guys.
These black routines were kept incidental to the plot, so that if the cavorting darkies were too uppity for some southern white theater owner, the offending section could be edited out of the film without disrupting the flow of the story.
Going to buy a paper doll that I can call my own, a doll that other fellas cannot steal, and all those flirty, flirty guys with their flirty, flirty eyes will have to flirt with dollies that are real.
End of song, beginning of story.
These black routines were systematically scrutinized by white producers looking for something hot. And no sooner had a black person created something new than it was preempted by the whites, who claimed it as their own. To add insult to injury, if a white character came upon a group of blacks doing their routine, the white person immediately took stage center and began to teach them how to correctly execute what had been stolen from them in the first place.
Why, it's Gabriel!
As far as Hollywood was concerned, anything a black person can do, even if he'd been doing it since birth, could be done better by a white person in 3 seconds. Not only that, blacks were required to stand around grinning and shaking their kinky heads in amazement. Lord of mercy, look a little massa, look a little missy.
Look at that gal sugar.
Well, these films didn't exactly set the box offices on fire with the colored audiences.
Tell me slow, tell me I'm crazy, maybe
Hollywood threw up its hands and declared that the colored audience was overly sensitive and they were going to give up on trying to appease us ungrateful, belly-aching darkies. And we went from the new Negro era to the no-Negro era. For a while there, blacks almost disappeared from the silver screen. But the boycott couldn't last because Hollywood knew there was money burning in those ebony pockets, and they wanted some of it. The business of America is business. Hollywood had discovered that if they used a black guy as part of the group of good guys in an action movie, putting him somewhere in the posse or platoon and not killing him off too soon, the Negro audiences came in droves.
Come on! Jefferson bastard! Come on, Jefferson!
The only problem was Hollywood wasn't too fond of having a virile, lusty black guy running around. And when it came to sexual matters, they figured, well, why take a chance? So Hollywood split the difference.
I'll take him.
Drama, oh no. For you, I want only the best, Lady Helena.
They used Negro hunks, okay.
I'll take the big black one.
But whenever there was a white woman around, he had to lurk in the distance.
I'm on my way.
Sometimes they had us around to be taken in by white con men. But outside of that, well...
Had a mighty hard time, but I'm on my way. Had a mighty hard time, but I'm on my way. It's a mighty hard climb, but I'm on my way. On my way, glory, hallelujah, I'm on my way.
We were personas non gratas.
That's your freedom. You're a free man, Jeff.
Unless it was absolutely necessary to the story. And if it were, there we would be up there bumbling but loyal, ready to die at the drop of a hat for our master or mistress.
Thank you, sir. Colonel Boy, you say I'm a free man?
That's right.
Well, if I'm free, then I got a right to decide what I'm going to do. Seems to me that's what you men are fighting for. So I reckon I'll stay.
Lake White Hook.
Oh, but they'll catch you, Jim. Please let me down. You gotta go free. You gotta get back to your wife and Joey. Put me down, Jim.
We've got to get you to a doctor, Hook.
Oh, Jim. Don't. No, Jim.
The actual behavior of a Negro character in any given film might seem to be predicated on the dramatic needs of that film. But through the accumulation of similar images from a zillion such films, the same behavior repeated in film after film, shot after shot, a less benign picture emerges.
Well, why doesn't it kill him? Kill him. Well, what's the matter now? Kill him!
Kill him, you imbecile.
Kill him!
Kill him!
Kill! Oh!
You're gonna make somebody a fine old lady one day.
While making concessions to the Negro's progress in society at large,
Send for Dr. Meade, ma'am.
American movies clung tenaciously to the cliches of the past in one form or the other. All in all, it was business as usual. The concessions Hollywood made were only tactical in nature. The strategic goal remained the same: to protect the status quo, perpetuate the myth of white supremacy, and thereby undermine the Negro's struggle for equality in the United States.
But the brothers and sisters were growing impatient with waiting for equality. They took to the streets in orderly marches. But good old Hollywood only heard the rumblings as a business opportunity.
One studio decided to do a movie about what they were sure black audiences wanted more than anything in the world: every Negro's secret desire, the jewel in the crown, so to speak: intermarriage. The studio figured they had a box office bonanza. Of course, they billed it as a great step forward for equality. Anyhow, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is about a black man's engagement to a white woman.
That's the story of, that's the glory of love.
Equality, huh? Never mind that the black guy was a scientist, a Nobel Prize candidate, a Pulitzer Prize winning butter wouldn't melt in his mouth type, who could practically walk on water, and that she was only a pimply-faced nobody. They were equally matched because she was white. Right? Right. The powers dominating Hollywood were not only race-specific, totally white, it was gender-specific, totally male. Not that things have changed that much. There's a continuing stream of books documenting the mistreatment of actresses at the hands of the macho, misogynist moguls of Hollywood, the inequities in pay, parts, power, etc. Endless epics of the second-class treatment of women.
T-Bone, you're too little and too late.
And these were white women.
Dig me, baby?
You're wasting your time right now, son.
If things were tough for a white woman, they were draconian for a black woman.
My folks is having them.
However, rarely are black actresses even mentioned in the books about Hollywood's exploitation of its females.
Give her to me.
Well, I've got a living child in me.
You let that nigga knock you up?
Nobody but you. This is your baby, Willie Joe. All yours. And you know, he just might be about as white as you.
Still gonna be a nigga?
Yes, Daddy. And he's gonna be something.
Emma?
Out in the street, the rumbling was growing louder and louder, and the marches were losing their gentility. In Hollywood, the unions decided to open their doors to minorities, and each one hired a minority or two and told them if they behaved themselves someday,
one of their race might even get a chance to actually touch the reins of creativity.
1967. I come back from France, show up at the San Francisco Film Festival as a French delegate with a feature film I'd just written and directed, La Permission. It was pretty embarrassing for the old USA. It had been 15 years since a black director had been able to scrape up enough to make a film. And Hollywood had never even had one. In the meantime, the rumbling in the streets had grown to a roar. Hollywood hired 3 black directors, Ozzie Davis, Gordon Parks, and myself, to prove to the world they weren't racist. Of course, they tried to sabotage our efforts by giving us substandard budgets and grade B scripts to do. Nevertheless,
These films were modestly successful, but it was axiomatic in the corridors of Hollywood that no black film could be a big-time blockbuster success. My answer was how would they know? They never made a truly black film, only white fantasies of what they thought black should want to see. It pissed me off.
We're nonviolent with people who are nonviolent with us, but we are not nonviolent with anyone who is violent with us. To any means necessary to bring about justice.
Hollywood was the one doing the dreaming. While Hollywood was clinging to make-believe fantasies, America was exploding. The streets were running blood. Maybe Rome wasn't burning, but Houston, LA, Chicago, New York sure were. I decided to kick Hollywood's ass. Which brings us to Sweetback. Like I said, it didn't just spring out of thin air.
Where's Sweetback?
Come on, boy! Look at me. I don't know where Sweetback is. Come on.
Sweetback was a huge financial success. It was also a take-no-prisoners political manifesto. So much so until the Black Panther Party, who J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, had declared public enemy #1, endorsed the film unconditionally and made it required viewing for all of its members.
Don't mark it.
Hey, Sweetback. I'm sorry, man. Forgot you two were attached together. Let's see if we can get a little air between you. Here, you step over here.
The way I saw it then, and still see it now, is that the biggest obstacle to progress in America is our conditioned susceptibility to the white man's program. Our minds have been colonized by images of black humiliation, marginality, subservience, impotence, and criminality that are ubiquitous in mainstream American cinema. These are the supposed self-images seen when African Americans look into the socio-cultural mirror of the cinema. We've been violated, confused, and drained by this colonization. And from this brutal, calculated genocide, the most vicious racism has grown. And it's with this starting point in mind and the intention to reverse the process that I went into cinema in the first fucking place. I think the highly vaunted visual power of the film came from the fact that, having taught myself, I missed the technical colonization of the white aesthetic. But back then, the way I put the images and the color and utilized the sound, folks called me crazy. Now they've started calling it the beginning of the black film aesthetic. And then when the film was finished and I had to have it rated, the jury was all white, and I refused to go to them. So they gave me an automatic X rating. Well, that didn't bother me either, because as far as I was concerned, I've been going to X-rated movies all my life. Hollywood took my formula, diminished the concept of negritude to a flamboyant cartoon, and reversed the political message, turning it into a counter-revolutionary one. And voila, out of the commercial success of Sweetback, to make a long story short, the blaxploitation movie was born.
Chef!
Right on.
Super dude, super fly. One chick hit squad. Cruise you a top. To do a job on the mob. As Foxy Brown.
But the images of blacks shooting and defeating whites even if the whites were slimy villains, didn't sit too well with Hollywood. And the financing began to dry up. The blaxploitation films got shoddier and shoddier, and the genre finally petered out. Hollywood no longer says that a black audience doesn't exist. Now it proclaims that a black audience only wants to see action films. The simple fact is that African Americans are not allowed to tell African American middle-class stories without studio, i.e. white intervention. And it's this white perspective forced on the material in the form of guidance that is so disastrous to the film. An African American cineast soon realizes that the deeper into the ghetto the story is set, and the lower down the economic scale, the more likely he or she is to be financed. Without much trouble, one can see the legacy of the Negro images of the past still reflected in the films today. We've still got a supposedly black movie actually being a thinly disguised showcase for white cleverness and or the entire paternalistic white social structure. We still got the Negro being saved by the liberal white man.
All South Africans.
There is an ever-increasing number of blacks working in the film industry. In the last 20 years, the cost of making an independent film has been greatly reduced, and many young filmmakers have seized the opportunity. If we step back a minute to view the era as a whole, we see the trick is no longer getting a film made, but getting it shown. And for now, distribution is in white hands. They are the gatekeepers and rule makers of what reaches the silver screen. For every Spike Lee, John Singleton, Julie Dash, there are many other black filmmakers wilting in the wings, unseen. Cinema was born in 1896. That was the same year that segregation became official in the United States. Discrimination was abolished in 1954. But film-wise, we're still waiting. Whoa, I'm not through. Don't go taking those shoes off yet. The treachery never stops. Every era brings its new tricks. The latest is if a black filmmaker does somehow manage to make a relevant black film like Malcolm X or Panther, the box office receipts are siphoned off at the cineplexes to other more acceptable movies by the racist exhibitors, thereby denying the profitability of such films, plus withholding the fiscal benefits from anyone daring to confront the system. Americans like to go on about money being money, neither black or white, but green. But when the hand holding the money is white, and the head connected to the hand is mired in the same old racist attitudes, it amounts to the same old yassa boss, show enough boss, racist stereotypes.
Yes, Miss Maggie.
Yes, Miss Maggie.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Miss Maggie.
Yes, Miss Maggie.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Say what? Miscarriage? Say what? Just a little miscarriage of justice. No. Tragic judicial aberration, my ass. Forget that. Not this time. We got a videotape of the crime. No justice, no peace. Forget business as usual. Slapping Negroes upside the head. Beating folks till they half dead. Go ahead. A goddamn conspiracy. Pissing on our legs. Then claiming it's just raining. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. The white man ain't no fool. The white man ain't no fool. Got me and you shuffling our behinds to the welfare line. Without one thin dime between us. Got us standing on the street corner without hope. Dealing dope, pulling on our penis. A goddamn claiming it's raining. No, no justice, no peace. White man ain't no fool. Claiming because he got the gold, God meant for him to make the rules. Ditching us with greed and hypocrisy. Misusing folks in the name of democracy. Poor folks tired of paying them dues. Now you want to talk. Talk about law and order. Talk about healing. Talk about peace. Yo, speaking of outrageous conduct, talk to them 12 white folks, not us. You ditched our schools, but we still ain't your fool. Better quit your tripping. Aggression in the game, can't nobody win. But everybody sure can lose.